This edition of Tech Talk is brought to you by GlobalSpeak.com, new media consultants, corporate video and audio communications, video and audio production and distribution, live and virtual event production. Tag TV and Tag Radio is a service of GlobalSpeak.com, creatively delivering powerful marketing, video, and audio solutions. Mark, welcome to Tech Talk.
Frank, good to be with you.
Change. Everything changes so fast. It's actually been so long ago. I'm thinking maybe a couple of decades ago that I read something like Future Shock by a guy who talked about change being so rapid that we wouldn't even recognize the fact that a building had been torn down and a new one had gone up since the last time we were there, and we would just think we were lost. And Mark, I tell you, it happened to me over the weekend. I mean, it's actually a case where things don't stay static for very long, and yet there's always one constant, one bottom line deliverable. You know, if it doesn't happen, nothing happens, and that's sales. So let's, get into what I'm sure that a lot of people have some misconceptions about, and you being on the front line for as long as you have, not only providing consulting, but even providing services from an expertise standpoint. What are the biggest failings that you see in sales management right now, today?
Well, Frank, I think you bring up a great point, and it really, I think, probably ties very nicely to what you just said, which is change. And, I think when I work with sales managers, executives, those types of people, I think the biggest thing that people are not doing is taking the time and just calling a time out and getting time by themselves to think about strategically what they need to get done. And I think to your point about change, they really are faced with so many new things coming at them and really so many tactics and people coming at them all day long that I think one of the biggest challenges sales managers, sales leaders, owners that manage face really has to do with not taking the time to sort of go to the mountain and think through what needs to happen and how we're going to do it and be strategic as opposed to always being reacting to whatever's thrown at them.
It sounds really great, but boy, I'll tell you what. I know that I've got I mentioned the weekend. My wife will take a bat and hit me in the head if I pick up that cell phone one more time. It seems like I'm addictive, and I'm afraid I'm going to miss every message I can possibly get. Certainly, we hear all about the problems in terms of driving and texting and whatever. I guess where I'm going. I think you'd have to go to as you say, maybe go to the mountain, but you'd have to leave your technology at home. Otherwise, I think you would be trying to, while you're meditating, to check your messages to make sure that something hadn't come in. Well, in that regard, I mean, how realistic can you? I mean, can you take the time to take a breath? I mean, I get the idea that idealistically, after you've done that, ideally you're more productive, and maybe you might want to go into one thing that sales leaders can do to be more productive. But can you take the time to give yourself that kind of thought process that opens your mind up to new ideas or new concepts and to be more productive?
Frank, I think it's a great question, but maybe even a better question is can you afford not to? And, again, I just think there's just so much of we're reacting to everybody else. And there's a number of kind of quotes that I've heard that I've taken to heart. One of them is you're either working out of your own inbox or someone else's. You're either part of your own plan or someone else's. So that's a quote from David Sandler, who was one of our founders of a lot of our philosophy. But, at the end of the day, you're either reacting to somebody else's, to your point about cell phones, about messages coming in and responding. Can we afford not to do that? Frank, sort of tongue-in-cheek, I would say there's a wonderful device that's a new piece of technology everybody ought to get familiar with. It's called the calendar. I say that half in jest, right? But, if we block time to go get away, and I think you can't do this in the office as a sales leader, as somebody that's trying to instigate change within their organization. I think they have to get away from the day-to-day. They have to leave the environment. They have to, put their phones, on silent. They have to put them on night mode, airplane mode, whatever it is, and get away from the office. Get somewhere where you can think about what's really going on and not be forced to just react to the latest crisis. And And I'll take one more second with that.
Sure.
Think about this for the listeners and the folks that manage. Don't we, in effect, become enablers at some point by always being so accessible to our sales teams, to some degree to our customers as well? We basically are training people how not to think for themselves and how to immediately reach out to someone else. And if we're there for them to answer the question, we force them to not think for themselves. I mean, okay, one more second. How many times have you had somebody text you for something or message you for something, and you didn't get back to them right away for some reason or another, and lo and behold, the problem fixes itself in a matter of minutes in a lot of cases.
Sure.
So food for thought.
Well, of course, the other side of it is that, again, depending on your level of addiction, and I almost dated myself by saying cell phone, because I think now you have to call them digital devices because they do so many other things besides just a telephony service, I guess, for lack of a better description. But I guess,
oftentimes that's the last thing people think about.
Exactly. Well, the other thing you were saying is that I know from my perspective, if I send out an email and I send out a text and I don't get an immediate response, I begin to think, they don't like me. They didn't like my offer. They didn't, and I start reverse negotiating with myself, kind of worrying about, why aren't they, getting back to me? I mean, there is a culture of individuality here that determines how you use some of these technologies. And one of the things I think heard somebody just recently say that you really can't take an offense out of some of these things because you're moving so quickly, and as you saying, not giving the process enough time and consideration that you're knee-jerking and literally reacting and rather than acting and second-guessing and worrying about something that really doesn't even exist. Let's talk a little bit about sales teams, because on one side it's challenging, but somewhat a level of adulation when you begin to identify what your weaknesses are and begin to find places where you can develop strengths and become better at what you do, a better salesperson. But in a team, you got high producers, not very many of them, but you certainly have high producers, and then the others that, not so productive, And so how do you get a sales team to be high-performing across the board?
Yeah, and that's, there's not really an easy answer to that in the sense of, we'll just do this, right? But a couple core fundamental beliefs that we've had, and number one is you got to raise your expectations. I think, again, maybe I'm full of quippy one-liners today, Frank, but you get what you tolerate. If you're familiar, or if your listeners have heard, the folks with us have heard that concept. I think there's a lot of truth to that. Especially as a leader, I think that there's a lot of things that we might let pass if, for example, us as a leader, if we have a fear or anxiety around confrontation, maybe we have a fear of, hey, this person's going to leave and I'm going to have to go recruit and find somebody else. There's all kinds of things that can creep into our heads that prevent us from actually addressing and dealing with the issues that come up from our salespeople. And then, of course, we allow things to happen. And then what that, Frank, 25 years, I guess, of managing salespeople of some variety or another, what we end up doing is creating a culture, not intentionally, but almost de facto by what we do or don't do. We create a culture, and that culture is really a gravity that just works in the background, either for us or against us at any given time. So I don't know if your thoughts, you want to add anything to that, but just a couple thoughts.
No, I think those are wise wisdoms. There's no two ways about it. The Eastern philosophers will say that the solution is simple. It's the implementation that kind of makes it tough. So, a lot of what you've come to practice and obviously have seen the results from and now, quote unquote, literally preach, are new and challenging to someone who hasn't got that almost safety line, if you will. They see their peers around them. The millenniums and Gen X's are running maybe 23/7, maybe not 24/7. They're not ever disconnected. And in that type of an environment, let's say that you're from a strategy and a philosophy that speaks of the kind of wisdom that you're talking about, and yet you've got to bring in new people. You've got to constantly look at additional salespeople. And I guess where I'm headed there is there a way to identify certain attributes that are better than others when you're looking to hire somebody?
Yeah, without a doubt. We do a lot of assessments and interviews on salespeople as a part of what we do. And one of the things, this one's very, I'll give you a couple that maybe aren't so obvious, but one of them, the number one across the board is ambition and drive. It's really, it's always funny to me, Frank, is that people that love to win have loved to win their entire lives. So when a sales leader is looking to hire someone, one of the things that we find is really important is to go back and look to see where have they been a winner in life beyond their most recent sales position. Because I got to tell you, that is one of the mistakes that I think managers make, is they look too much at the most recent past success, in terms of a resume or a background or what they did in their last job. I have seen more salespeople that actually produced good numbers that actually turned out to be pretty poor salespeople because they were in the right position with the right product at the right time, and they got lucky. And over time, Frank, people don't get lucky over decades. I mean, it is a mindset, a belief, a work ethic. And so you got to look deep when you're looking for the characteristics that make up great salespeople. Is it's inbred, it's in their DNA, it's in their identity of who they are. And I think, too many people, when they interview, they spend too much time talking about technically what their expertise is and what performance results they got in their last job, or what skill sets they particularly have. I would look much further at what mindsets do they possess. It's going to be a much better predictor of results.
It's interesting. I was a while back speaking to some people over at SCAD, the Savannah School of Art and Design, and they were talking about young people coming in and knowing everything that there was to know about whatever new apps and new technologies that there were for whatever they were involved in, whether it was photos or videos or artwork of one kind or another. But the funny part was, they said it isn't about training them for technology. That they already know, but what they don't have is a sense of identity and place, a sense of perspective, a sense of, the richness of why you shadow, and, the techniques and the things that you do that make a painting. So while you can have the technology that does it, if you don't understand it, even though it's easier to do, it doesn't come out anywhere near with the same energy or the same impact, because you really don't understand, quote unquote, the context. And I think in a way that's kind of what you're talking about. You talked about best attributes, and unfortunately quickly running out of time here, but let's talk about biggest mistakes. Maybe you covered it a little bit, because I know for one tip I'll take away is looking past the sales performance and getting into what they do successful in their lives. I mean, that may seem obvious on the surface, but I hate to admit that I've probably done less looking at that than I should have, and I'll pay more attention to it from now on.
You're in good company, my friend.
But what are some of the biggest mistakes beyond the ones I make?
Okay, so here's one that we see all the time, and it's such a deceiver for people that are hiring salespeople. There's a perception out there that, there's some truth to what I'm about to say. So let's not take it completely out of context, but that people buy from people that they like, and that's true. There's no mistaking about that. But over the course of my lifetime, and yours as well, and especially I think over the last 5 or 10 years, people can like you, but if you bring value to the business relationship, they're going to buy from you, or at least they're going to give you a good look. Now, let me clarify that, Frank, because I don't want people to say that it's not important for people to like you, because it is. But the real issue is can you bring value? Can you ask good questions? Can you cause people to think about things that they've never thought of before as a salesperson's meeting with somebody that they're trying to qualify and sell? So where does that lead us in the hiring side and the biggest mistake? One of the biggest mistakes I see is managers start to like somebody in the hiring process. And there's a pretty significant population of salespeople that are very friendly, they're kind of charming, they're pleasant, they're likable people. They're a nice guy or gal. The problem is those same characteristics, Frank, really get in the way of being able to ask difficult questions, of being able to challenge people in a new way. Because if I want you to like me a lot, and I'm really good at sort of the bonding part of things. What I might not do is I might not ask you any challenging questions that would cause you to think about different things. And so I'd say that one of the biggest issues that managers make mistakes around there is falling in love with a candidate because they're friendly, they're easy to talk with, but that may not be and oftentimes is not necessarily the most successful producer that you're going to hire. Make sense?
Sure it does, and even more so, one of the things that I feel strongly about, because there's so many things that you can't possibly know them all, is the issue of trust and how important it is to have a good partner, if you will, strategic partner that you know you can count on, that is going to tell you the fact that you got to hear, whether it's good or bad, and someone that's going to be trustworthy enough to make sure that their interests are your interests and your interest is their interest. As we close, talk a little bit about your particular, as far as Sandler is concerned. How does an engagement happen? Is it something that I identify the fact that I'm looking for someone, or I've got a sales organization and I think they can do better? What would be something that, from the perspective of the client, that I could say, I know I've got that problem, I need to call Sandler?
Yeah, for us, it really is organizations, that have a sales team, and usually they're pretty high-performing organizations already. They're doing a good job, but they're looking for an edge. They don't want to hire salespeople. They want to hire people that really do a great job of qualifying, which I think is a big mistake people make, is they try too hard to sell everybody something as opposed to, hey, let's figure out whether there's a fit, and disqualify as hard as they should be qualifying. So really our world is around helping sales organizations and sales leaders do a better job of putting good business processes in place so that their sales team is really just more efficient, more effective, that they produce a higher result. And that's what I get my joy out of, without a doubt, Frank.
Another philosophy: when the teacher's ready, the student appears, and when the student is ready, the teacher appears. I think that it's a case where I think a lot of our listeners are hearing both the teacher and the student, and they are also, in effect, learning a lot of insights that they already know and understand and feel, but needed that kind of validation that you talked about today. Really, really good stuff, Mark. Thank you so much for taking time out of what I know is a really busy schedule over at Sandler, but to take a few minutes to share those wisdoms and thoughts with us today on Tech Talk.
My pleasure. And I'll throw this out. We're always open to conversations with good people, and anybody wants to reach out to us, you can get us on the web at salesengine.sandler.com, or always email us, mark.mcgraw@sandler.com. Always happy to be of help to good people at TAG.